Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and this is my review of episode 6 of season 2 of the Orville. And it was a very fun episode as usual, very enjoyable, and also as usual kind of copying ideas that were in Star Trek. This episode is more similar to the TNG episode called In Theory. There were a lot of very similar scenes in this episode, but different enough that I'm not really complaining about it. So anytime I mention this, some people think I'm complaining about the show. I still love the show, I enjoy the show, but I do feel deja vu in almost every single episode, which always reminds me of Star Trek episodes and sometimes entire scenes which seem very similar. So it's obvious this show is really taking a lot of inspirations from Star Trek, and I'm fine with that as long as they improve on those ideas or do them differently or do it as a parody and make it funnier. Then I'm totally okay with that. And I'm not talking from a legal perspective. I have no idea how much of it would be considered legal or not. If it ever goes to court, it would actually be an interesting case. But I'm personally fine with that. In general, I think copyright laws are too strict. That's why I sometimes even defend Star Trek Discovery when it also heavily borrows ideas from a lot of other science fiction shows and movies. It's funny how Star Trek Discovery is ripping off everything in existence except the good Star Trek episodes, and yet the Orville is ripping off the best Star Trek episodes. So obviously the Orville is a much better show, much more enjoyable, much more lovable, visually much more pleasant, which is also maybe why we are more forgiving toward it when it kind of copies stuff from Star Trek pretty directly. So as I said, this episode is very similar to the episode In Theory, which was about Data getting a girlfriend, and Isaac was always a very similar character to Data, the way he misunderstands things, and that's funny. And there is a scene in this episode in which Dr. Finn tells him, "Let's flip the table," and then he does it literally, so that was funny. And in TNG there were a lot of scenes like that, like once he was talking with Guinan, that was in the same episode about his relationship with the girlfriend, and when he asked her about it she said, "Don't look at me," and then he physically turned away, so he understands the things literally, and that's funny, that's very comedic. So Isaac has always been very similar to Data. It's also funny how in this episode they keep saying the word Data in a lot of different scientific dialogues. So they said Data so much that when Isaac went into the simulator and gave himself a human appearance, I half expected to see Brent Spiner appear. Instead it was the actor who actually plays Isaac who appeared in that scene, and he played it so well that I think this guy could have played an android like Data without all the robotic costume in it. He would be perfect. Maybe later in the series maybe it will be done, maybe he will give himself a human appearance, that might be interesting. So this was a great opportunity to see the actual actor, and also the actor who voices Yaphet also appears in the simulator, and he still has shape-shifting powers, and then he takes something from the bar. And that also reminds me of a Deep Space Nine episode in which Odo was in a holosuite, and he also did that kind of trick. He showed someone how he can stretch his arm out, and so maybe that also inspired this episode. So anyway, I do think it's fun to see all these actors in their true form. It kind of reminds me of the Deep Space Nine episode Far Beyond the Stars, which also showed all the crew in their human form without the makeup, which was fun. And speaking of makeup, I think Bortus looked great with the mustache. I was really disappointed when he removed it in the end of the episode. I really think they should have kept that. He looked great. He kind of reminded me of Henry Cavill for some reason. Probably the mustache. That reminds me of those clean orcs in Star Trek Discovery who suddenly have hair and they all look terrible, even worse than before. But I'll get to that in my next video. I'll review Star Trek Discovery. It might be a very long review because there's so much stuff going on with it, and seeing the Orville after that was like literally like taking a pill to relieve a headache. This show is so much more fun, so much more enjoyable, and my only minor complaint of it was that it really kind of mirrors the TNG episode In Theory, really almost scene to scene. Like that episode also started with Data and his future girlfriend kind of bonding over music. They both play in a band. And here it's something similar. Here Isaac taught her son to play, and then they go on a date and watch a concert. Actually, the production value of the Orville is surprisingly even better than in TNG. Like in TNG they showed like 4 or 5 people playing, and yet here they show us an entire orchestra playing. So in some ways Orville is even better than TNG. And obviously the special effects improved since then and so on, even though we don't really see that in this episode. It's kind of a bottle show. That's another minor complaint. Like I do wish there was some overarching story arc as well. Most of the episodes in this season kind of feel like bottle shows, so that's also a minor complaint. On the other hand, it does give the episode the time it needs to really play with the story fully, to fully explore this idea. So anyway, she asks him out, and then they start dating, and then he seeks advice of his crew members, exactly like Data sought advice. And the funny scene was later in the episode when he decided to break it off, and then he took the advice by Lamar to kind of to make her dump him, and so he deliberately starts behaving in an obnoxious way. So that also reminded me of that scene in which Data started playing a program in which he deliberately starts a fight. So that was also a similar idea, but the execution was totally different, which is why I'm fine with it. So I'm not really complaining because this was different enough, and this scene was actually funnier here. When we see Isaac sitting on a couch in his underwear pretending to be like a bad husband, that was really funny, even though that Data scene of him pretending to fight was also really funny, and that was also comedy gold. And I kind of expected the episode to end badly the same way as the TNG episode, in which they basically broke off and Data doesn't care. And yet here we had a happy ending in which they did decide to stay together, and there was a scene of them kissing on the bridge with water falling down on them because she said that she wishes to see rain, and so he arranged that on the bridge. My only thought at that was if the Krill attack right now, you'd be screwed. But I guess all the equipment is waterproof, so that's fine. And one of the things that this show might be better than TNG with is the fact that it doesn't limit itself to be too episodic, meaning there are some story elements which do progress from episode to episode, and that was one of the problems in the old Star Trek shows, in which they were always making it super episodic. Everything had to return exactly to normal, and that was very limiting because they couldn't really do stuff like relationships. It always had to end in the very same episode it began, and that was a little bit annoying sometimes because a lot of times they could have made it a lot deeper. They could have explored the relationship much better if they could drag it out a little bit. On the other hand, I think it might have been a good thing because it prevented the show from becoming totally a soap opera, and also it prevented them from dragging out stories too long, which is one of the problems, in my opinion, of newer shows, even Star Trek Discovery, which just feels like a very long and boring movie because they are never in a hurry to finish any one story, and so they just keep delaying everything again and again and again. You never get to the conclusion until the end of the season, and that feels very boring. And yet in the old shows, because they were episodic, they had to conclude the story in the same episode, and so it never felt as if they were dragging it out. It never felt like too much filler. Sometimes the opposite. Sometimes it felt rushed. Sometimes I felt that it would have worked better as a longer story arc because the potential was there for a much deeper story. So I personally think the best way is what Deep Space Nine was doing, meaning every episode had its own story, which always concluded, but the series also had those bigger story plots which did progress from episode to episode, and also relationships which did evolve and progress over the series, like Jodzi and Worf, for example. So that's why I think Deep Space Nine had the best possible formula. Each episode had its own story, which usually concluded, at least some of it was concluded, and also a bigger story, which took a lot of episodes to build up and conclude, and so that was the perfect formula in my opinion. So I think the Orville should be in that same way, and so far it is. So far each episode does have its own main story, and also they do allow the characters to have relationships and to evolve. And my only complaint again is that there is no overall aim to the show. I mean, where is the ship going? Where are they flying? Do they have some kind of mission? What is their purpose out in space? Do they just fly randomly around? So I do wish the show would have some kind of bigger plot as well, and not just this episodic nature, which does feel a little bit like a bottle show. At least in this season. The previous season was much better in that way, I think, because each episode had some kind of science fiction ideas, and these are science fiction shows, so I want to see science fiction ideas. Now, they did play with the idea of artificial intelligence and the human and the potential for a love story, so that is a science fiction idea, and so I do hope they continue to explore it. So I was happy to see that everything did not return to normal in the end of the episode, and maybe they will explore this idea much more, and I hope they do. So I'm happy that they didn't press the reset button in the end of this episode, returning everything to normal. I am happy that it seems as if they are planning to continue this relationship plot, because I do think it will be interesting to explore, and hopefully it will also have a lot more original ideas and a lot of funny situations. I think it's fine to take inspiration and copy it a little bit, especially if it's done for a comedy, but I also want this show to feel more fresh, to feel as if they're making up their own plots and making up their own ideas and not just copying Star Trek. So that's my only minor complaint, and again I say I still love the show, but I'm just being honest that I do feel a little bit of deja vu in almost every single episode, and I wish it would be a little more creative, and only then I'll be able to give this show a 10. So far I would say I give it an 8 and maybe 9 in some episodes, But I can't really give an episode a 10 if I don't feel as if they brought a lot of new ideas and a lot of creativity and imagination to it. If it also shows me some kind of new science fiction idea, or at least done in some new way, which feels fresh and creative and imaginative, only then I'll be able to give it a 10. If it blows my mind like the old Star Trek used to do. When I was a kid and I watched TNG, they had so many episodes with some kind of mystery which you don't know what's going to happen next, and you're on the edge of your seat and you're curious what will happen, and they deliver something great and amazing and leave you with something to think about and to debate about. And that's, in my opinion, why TNG was such a great show. And I know it's much harder to do it nowadays, since pretty much all the ideas you could imagine have been done somewhere, but still I wanted the show to do something which I didn't see before, or in a new kind of way which I didn't see, and to really blow my mind and to surprise me, and some kind of science fiction idea. That's what I would really love to see, and if they do that, then I will give it a 10. Otherwise, it's just a fun show, but I can't say it's great. I can't put it higher than TNG, even though in some places they have a bigger production value and the space scenes all look much better because technology simply evolved. But still, I think the most important thing is the story. And that's what was so good about TNG. They had a lot of good stories and so original at the time. So I really hope the Orville will be able to do something like that. Only then I'll be able to say it's a truly great show like TNG. So that's my thoughts for today. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it in the comments. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope to see you next time. Bye bye.